traumatic brain injury recovery.
All right, everyone, welcome to our Saturday speaker meeting. I am really happy to have Dr. Dan Gardner here with us this morning. I don't know if Dr. Gardner likes when I say this, but I describe him as the brain injury guru in San Diego. He has been in the brain injury community for a long time. He's got such a high level of expertise, a deep level of expertise in the brain injury world. Dr. Gardner is a psychiatrist and psychotherapist who specializes in working with brain injury survivors. He's going to be talking a bit today about the idea of why do I feel this way after a TBI, and giving us maybe a different framework for how to understand brain injury. And so with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Gardner here. Appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kurt, for the kind introduction and giving me the opportunity to speak. I enjoy that. I hope everybody's doing the best they can to meet the challenges of the pandemic and what else we're dealing with. So today I want to address a number of questions that are important to me and most of the people I work with. I want to talk about why I feel this way after a brain injury. I also want to talk about why do similar brain injuries cause different problems. So if two people get hit in the head with a soccer ball at the same speed, why is the outcome different, perhaps very different for each person? I want to talk about diagnosis, the importance of making a diagnosis before we start a treatment. Now, when I gave this talk a couple of years ago, I asked, why is it important? And one of the attendees today, Chuck, raised his hand and said, gee, when he had a stroke, when he went to the ER, the doctors thought he was drunk. And so obviously there's a big difference between a stroke and the diagnosis of intoxication, and the treatment that follows is quite different. The other thing I want to talk about is perspective, which is most helpful for me in understanding traumatic brain injury. And that's the biological, psychological, and social perspective. It's a broad, comprehensive one that helps me to take as much as possible into account and not leave out important issues that keep me influencing the outcome or the manifestations of the brain injury. For example, the biological part, let's say somebody has a headache and the headache gets worse. Well, is it because a collection of in the brain, they have a pneumonia and a urinary tract infection? Is it because they had an argument with their spouse and they're having a headache? So we want to look at a broad set of areas, try to understand what's going on, and then of course, how to intervene. The last thing I want to talk about is finding meaning and purpose in recovery from brain injury. And I like to look at that as how can I help myself and how can I help others? So the goal here, as in any medical condition, is a well thought out diagnosis, well thought out, not jumping quickly to a conclusion because of some time pressure or some bias that I as a treater have. A good understanding of the medical condition in the context of the whole person's life, and then coming up with customized and tailored treatment to that individual, not a one-size-fits-all approach. That's our goal. Now, is that sometimes idealistic and unrealistic? Maybe so, because of patient resources, time, and so on, but that would be the gold standard. So I'm talking about biases and pressures. That's a problem. So what do I mean by that? Well, what if you see your healthcare provider and because he or she works in a certain system, there are productivity demands. And so you don't have more than 20 minutes to see a new patient. That's a real challenge. What if that's bias? Now, I'm very psychologically oriented, although I've had a good background in internal medicine. But I'll tell you a big mistake that I made early on in my career. Now, excuse me, some of you have heard this story multiple times, but I like to tell it to remind myself not to have blinders on and take too narrow an approach when I deal with a new patient. My first week of internal medicine internship, and I'm very interested in the psychological aspects of illness. So me and my team are assigned a new admission to the hospital. 50-year-old man who'd been on a vacation the previous weekend with his lover, and there was an argument and they broke up. Right after that, he's admitted to the hospital, and his chief complaint is progressive weakness in his lower extremities. And when we interviewed him, he also had some breathy presentation, and I consider that to be a bit overly dramatic. Physical exam showed no objective findings. So I, being so psychologically oriented, very proudly wrote in the chart, I think the diagnosis is hysterical conversion disorder. And I was so confident, and I thought, oh, I'm going to impress my classmates, I'm going to impress my attending physicians, my teachers. That's the frame of mind I was in when I left that evening. So the next morning, I'm walking down the hall, and at the other end of the hall, there's a swarm of medical personnel that's around this patient's bed that was on wheels, and they're pushing the bed furiously towards the intensive care unit, and they're also using a respirator bag to breathe for him. I was in shock. So, and I found out either later that day or the next day that the diagnosis was not hysterical conversion reaction. What was it? It was polio. Polio. He was one of the few people who'd never had the polio vaccine. That made such a big impression on me right then and there. Do not blinders on. If all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail. That's not the way to practice medicine. Later that year, I made another mistake. Somebody came into the clinic, middle-aged man complaining of pain in his lower back, and he was telling me about an argument he just had with his son. So I write in the chart, the back pain is because his son is a pain in the back. Here I am, cute formulation. So then I look at the x-rays and I see a big bone spur that's likely pressing on some nerve. Again, it was a good lesson for me early on. I'll talk a little more about some examples of the two conclusions. Thinking about making the diagnosis in the context of who that person is. Each of us is unique. We're all unique. That explains why two people get hit with a soccer ball, my other example, or two people have a slip and fall, they're about the same height and weight. Why may the outcome be very different? Well, think about that. So how is a person unique? Let's look at the physical status. When you're doing an evaluation, look at the physical status. The age. You think somebody who's 80 is going to be as resilient as somebody who's 18? No. What about the medications they might be taking? Would that make them more or less vulnerable? Are there side effects that come into play? What about other conditions they might have? High blood pressure, high blood sugar, and so on and so forth. Those are all important to take into account. The other thing is current relationships. Well, what if he has a brain injury and they're an adolescent? They're trying to form an identity, not sure who they really are, where they're going in life, what their occupation is. That's adolescence versus somebody who's solidly in a relationship, either married or in a committed relationship, and they have a solid career. Do you think they're going to be a little more resilient to an injury? What about life experiences? So I'm talking about early life experiences. How were we parented? Did our parents treat us respectfully? Was there a trusting relationship? And when I say respectfully, was there a lack of neglect? Was there a lack of abuse? Were we able to trust authority figures? If there were some problems there, some bumps in the road, then an injury like a brain injury is going to cause more distress, and it would be harder for us to adapt to. The other thing is coping style, a personality style or coping style. I like to define that as an habitual way of relating to our own emotions and a habitual way of relating to other people. For example, when we encounter distressing feelings like an injury and all the losses and frustration and disappointment that follow injury, what's our characteristic way of handling distress? Well, let's say we're a very orderly, tidy, punctual person. I remember having a patient who was an engineer, and he didn't feel much in control of his life after the injury, and he would make charts every day, and that was his way of having a modicum of control in his life. Or another personality style would be somebody who doesn't have self-confidence and looks for an expert outside of him to just guide him and tell him what to do. So again, that's another solution. Find the right expert and listen to that advice and take it as gospel. And there are other styles that I won't have time to get into in this talk today. About the concept of protective barrier. That was coined by a neuropsychologist named Thomas Kay in the early 90s. It said when a force hits us, the way we respond to that force, the way the problems will manifest and the degree of resilience has to do with this protective barrier. And the protective barrier has three major components. So there's the force hitting the protective barrier, like the soccer ball is going to be headed by this player. Or another metaphor would be a tornado. There's a tornado, And which of these houses do you think would be most resilient to the force of this tornado? This straw house here, this wooden house here, or this house made of stone? So the components of the protective barrier, the first is the biological component. They're all important. Depending on the unique situation, one may be much more important than the other. But again, it's important to look at all of these areas if we have the time and resource to do that. So biological, the status and structure of the brain and the function of the brain. Is there any swelling of the brain? Is there any fluid collection? Any blood in the brain? Obviously, we want to find out if something's easily correctable. Are there seizures after the injury? If that's true, have they been evaluated and adequately treated? What's the age? Again, an 8-year-old is going to be far more resilient than an 80-year-old. Prescription drugs, what are those drugs? How are they helping, and how might they be holding us back? Did somebody review the list of meds that the brain injury survivor is on to make sure that they're giving the optimal benefits and not causing any problems? For example, a lack of alertness or slowed thinking or forgetfulness or distractibility, because we probably all know that there are certain meds that have those particular side effects. Previous concussions, the football players who get multiple concussions, and how that will cause injury and sometimes result in chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Fluid collections, we talked about that. Now, is somebody taking alcohol and drugs? That's one way of coping with stress. The other thing is hormonal imbalances and metabolic imbalances. The pituitary gland is at the base of the brain. What if that's jostled and shaken up, and then hormone production of the body is off balance? We could get a low growth hormone, which could cause fatigue, slowness, being tired. We could get a low thyroid hormone that could lead to the same. It could lead to depression. Now, what about the psychological factors? Past experiences and personality style, we talked a little about that. I'm thinking of a case where somebody was very embarrassed about emotional lability. At times they couldn't control their emotions. They would just flood right out, and they would laugh, they would cry, and it was very embarrassing. And then I came to understand, knowing a little about his background, why he was so upset. First of all, it's upsetting to most of us, but he was more upset than most because this lability after his brain injury reminded him when he was in grade school, he had had an accident and wet his pants in school, and he was shamed by the others in school. It was really humiliating for him. Again, personality style. How important is it for us to be independent and self-sufficient? And how easy is it for us to ask for help and accept help? Those things really respond to brain injury. And I'll elaborate as we go on here. Ecological resources. So let me ask you a question. We have had a year of pandemic, a year of disruption and uncertainty, and now eagerness to get a vaccine, and wondering, with the storms in Texas and in the Southwest, is the vaccine going to be delayed? When are we going to get it? When is there going to be herd immunity? When is it going to be safe? Everybody has this anxiety. I will tell you, nobody I've talked to doesn't mention it. Do you think that that is not taking some energy from us and making it more of a challenge to deal with chronic medical conditions? I think it is. Now, social, what about social connections? Our family connections, coworkers, groups, friends, really, really helpful to make us feel we're connected, we've got a community, we're not alone. We got somebody to share our concerns with, our thoughts, our good humor with, our laughter. And then what are other organizations? Religious organizations, work, academic, special interest groups. Depending on the presence or absence, it may make it more difficult or less difficult to manage these problems. So anybody with a brain injury has a degree of the three things here, depending on the severity of the brain injury. Okay, dependency, what do I mean by that? Well, what if I can't walk well? I may need somebody to help me transfer. What if I can't feed myself? What if I am forgetful? I have to depend on maybe my iPhone or a notebook or something. So I'm not as self-sufficient as I used to be. What about loss of control? I was talking about the man who lost control of his emotions. Or what if we have a bladder, an incontinence problem? Again, loss of control. And incapacity. Well, I can't do the job. I can't do my occupation. I can't be the father I used to be. I can't be the husband I used to be. All of these issues, dependency, loss of control, incapacity, cause distressing feelings. The ability to adapt to these stresses depends on how we dealt with them in earlier life. We were all, as infants and toddlers and so on, we were not self-sufficient. We weren't in control of our lives. We weren't able to do whatever we wanted to do. And so we had to deal with these issues, dependency, loss of control, and incapacities, or lack of what we wished for, earlier in life. And so how did we deal with them? If we dealt with them in childhood pretty well, it's more likely we're going to deal with current in those same areas better. So if we become more dependent, we're going to adapt to it better. But if we didn't, that's what makes it harder. If we didn't in childhood, we're going to have greater resilience if there's an absence of neglect, an absence of abuse, and trusting relationships with parents. So I'm going to give you a case example that tries to illustrate the protective barrier, the biological, the psychological, and social. So we can try to understand what's going on, and importantly, how can we intervene in a case. So this is a case of Tom, the wounded warrior. He had a blast injury and more. Tom was 26 and married for 4 years. They had home mom, a 3 and a 1-year-old, and a sister who lived nearby. After the blast injury, Tom had these physical problems. He had headaches and dizziness. His balance was off, couldn't see as well. He had hearing impairment, and he had back pain from the injury and his back surgery. He was drowsy, and his thinking was slowed from medications he took for the pain. He was so discouraged about his incapacity, the fact that he couldn't be the husband, the father that he wished to be, he started drinking too much. So he self-medicated with alcohol. What about psychological symptoms? He had nightmares of the blast, flashbacks, he was depressed, and very irritable and short-tempered with his wife and children. What about his childhood? So how did his childhood prepare him to deal with these challenges? Tom had stern parents, and in his family, feelings were not displayed or talked about. And the most important thing was self-sufficiency. And having to lean on anybody was a sign of weakness, not of strength. And weakness and being unmasculine. Tom was really admired for his physical abilities, his athletic abilities. So one can speculate that if Tom is injured and he has these impairments that we talked about, how's he going to feel about having to depend on others for help and having to go to doctors and being asked to follow regimens, feeling like he can't solve it all by himself? It's going to be harder for somebody like Tom. What about his pre-injury state? Let's talk about what his emotional state was before the injury. He was anxious about some debt. His wife was supportive but overworked. There was some tension between his wife and his sister. There was some envy. He did have a good circle of friends, and he was very active in his baseball league. How does Tom feel now? What's his emotional state now after the injury? He's angry. He blames the squad leader for putting him in a situation where an IED exploded and he's injured. He's got complications, including lots of pain from his back surgery. His sister isn't as helpful as he had hoped. And he's feeling very sad and very guilty about not being able to help his wife be the husband that he wants to be and be the father that he wants to be. Get down on the floor, roughhouse with the kids, play ball, and so forth. Cognitive, he's forgetful. Social connection. So because of the injury, he withdraws from his friends. He stops attending church. He feels so embarrassed so badly. He looks at other people that are his contemporaries and he's seeing they're getting on with life and he's being left in the dust and he's regressed. And it's too painful for him at this point in time. So he withdraws. So how do we understand his post-injury problems? Here's a common issue. When somebody has a symptom, let's say they're forgetful, let's say they're distractible, what are the contributions of these things listed here? What about brain injury itself? But what about the reaction to the brain injury, the depression, the anxiety, depressed about the losses that we've talked about, anxious about the occupational future, the financial future. Is our family going to stick with us? How are they going to feel about us? All this depression and anxiety. What about pain? Like in Tom's case, the back pain, the surgical complications. And what about med side effects? So what I'm saying is when we look at these symptoms, particularly the cognitive symptoms, we want to make sure that we're addressing these other issues. Why? Because they're often correctable or they're modifiable. Maybe there is a degree of loss of brain cells, but if there is untreated depression or there is pain that could be evaluated and treated and the meds could be changed, it might make a big difference. Now, I'm just going to throw up some things here that people talk about that contribute to the symptoms. And these are like neurotransmitters, certain brain cells, certain genes, certain parts of the nerve cell. I'm not going to go over each of these, but there are all these ways of looking at a brain injury. And again, I want to say that no one way is the absolute correct way. So we're talking about nutrition here and micronutrients and supplements and minerals. In other words, if I had a brain injury, I might consult a nutritionist, but I wouldn't say that's the only way of understanding and addressing my problems after brain injury. Other ways to understand it, whether there's bruising on the brain, what happened during anesthesia, was there low blood pressure, was there low amount of oxygen, did the surgery cause some inflammation of the part of the brain that has to do with memory? Are Tom's problems because he's not sleeping well, because he's so distressed about having to lean on others that he doesn't have control of his life, he's not the father he used to be, his relationships are disrupted, his personality style was not to lean on people, not to ask for help, and then the guilt. I just feel terrible, I can't be the father, I like to be the husband, and so forth. So again, the pitfall that biases and pressure, I'll just remind us again, if all we have is a hammer, everything's a nail. If I just do nutrition, if I just think of the psychological stuff, not a good idea. Try as much as we can to be open-minded. I'll give you some examples. I talked about the case of the polio patient and the back pain patient. I'll give you another side of the coin. When I was a student, I took a psychiatry rotation at a hospital that was very psychoanalytically oriented, and I really enjoyed it because I thought they had such deep understanding of people's motivations. And at that time, they had two antidepressants, Tofranil and Elavil, and they had about 3 or 4 antipsychotic medications. Nothing like the new generation of meds that we have. So when I talked to the chief resident, who was brilliant, I said, can you tell me what's the role of medications in depression and these anxieties and these psychoses? He says, very dismissively, he says, if you really want to learn about that, here's the physician's desk reference, the PDR, you read about it on your own. That was the bias at the time. Then on the other side, the biological bias. So I'll tell you another story. Sometime early in my psychiatry residency, after I did my internal medicine internship, and one of the first cases I had was a 19-year-old who had had an acute schizophrenic decompensation. And he was on a bus to Los Angeles. He stood up and he announced that he was the Messiah. He was going to Los Angeles to save Los Angeles. Then he was hospitalized at the VA, and I spent a lot of time talking with them and trying to formulate my understanding of the case. I was really eager to come to the hospital the next morning because I knew that that evening the attending physician, my teacher, was going to come in, read my evaluation, my formulation, and then impart his pearls of wisdom. And I walked in eagerly the next morning. I opened the chart and I see one line only of comment. And it says, have you considered ritalin 10 milligrams? And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? Am I in the wrong place? There was a very biologically oriented psychiatrist talking about anxiety disorders, what medications we use to treat anxiety disorders. After the lecture, I raised my hand. I said, Dr. Jones, would you please comment on the role of psychotherapy in anxiety disorders? And he sneered and dismissively said, that's on the back of the blackboard. I really believe that's dead wrong, to be so intolerant and dismissive of other points of view. Again, we ask the question, why are things so complicated? I wish they were simple. The simple message is, well, life is complicated and it's tough. It's to keep looking, but that's the way it, to get the best outcomes, I think that's what we have to grapple with and address. So it's not only the kind of injury that matters, but the kind of head. The protective barrier is what will determine how our symptoms and problems are and how well we deal with them. How do we find purpose and meaning in recovery? What can we do with the new me? Find new me, accepting the new me, and using that to our advantage and to the advantage of others? Big question. Number one, let's fix what we can. Let's not say, okay, this is the way it is. It's going to be this way forever. I got this chronic headache. I've got this tinnitus. I've got this chronic depression. I remember somebody early on in my career, a neurologist, who said, well, yeah, they're depressed. They just had an injury. They just had a stroke, and that's life. The implication was you don't do anything about it. You just live with it. Not the case. There are ways. I mean, talking therapy is helpful to help somebody deal with the losses. In certain cases, if it's well thought out, some low dose antidepressant medications can be very helpful. Now, again, it's not in everybody, but something to consider. As there are other things certainly besides medications and talking therapy. Getting involved with the Brain Injury Foundation, help others get into that. But fix what we can. What do we want to look at? Let's get some lab tests. Make sure that's something easily correctable. Low thyroid hormone, a growth hormone deficiency, and anemia, things like that. It's easy to do. What about imaging? Make sure there's no collection of fluid or bleeding in the brain that could be correctable. What about seizures after the head injury? Has there been an EEG, an electroencephalography? What about headaches? Let's get those evaluated and other pain evaluations. Vision, hearing, balance, because there are some treatments that could at least mitigate those things. What about sleep disorders? Common after brain injury. I think a sleep evaluation would be very helpful. And then, of course, review of medication. When people come to me and they are telling me they're anxious, depressed, or having some symptom that one might say is a mental, first thing I say is, let's talk about your current medications. What are you taking? And we'll meticulously go through those meds to figure out what the benefits of the meds are and what the potential side effects are. An individual med is causing a side effect, or a combination of meds are interacting poorly. And often it's the case that taking away meds may be the way to go. Please, before you make any change to your therapy, please discuss it with your healthcare provider. Neuropsychological testing. Why is that important? Because it's complex testing of our cognitive functions, our memory, our attention, our speed of processing, our ability to solve problems, to plan, to organize. And that will tell us where our strengths are and where our challenges are. And based on those findings, the neuropsychologist, the cognitive remediation therapist, often speech therapist, will help us come up with exercises or with compensatory strategies to strengthen those areas or to find workarounds. And then a psychological and psychiatric evaluation. Sometimes it's a biological depression on the basis of brain injury, not because of the other psychological issues I talked about previously, but sometimes it's the losses they're experiencing, the loss of their job and their role in the family and economic and so on. It would benefit anybody to talk about those things and get appropriate treatment.
Okay.
We're talking about finding purpose and meaning. Fix what we can. We talked about lab tests, imaging, EEG, all these different evaluations. Here. Also, if I want to get a good understanding, I try to talk to the spouse, the family member, especially somebody who knew the brain injury survivor before the injury, and then since the injury, to see what changes and what areas that make sense. And then often it's nice to have a case manager. Again, we're talking about optimal situation, a case manager involved to help coordinate. Amy was talking about forgetting to go to appointments. This is so common. And so it's great to have a case manager to understand the scope of the issue and then guide the brain injury survivor through a series of evaluation treatments. Before I go on to I want to continue this fixing what we can, keeping up with what's going on in research and treatment. On my website, I do have a page called Traumatic Brain Injury Searches, and that searches the professional literature. And if you want to find out what the latest stuff is, like here's a customized search engine that I put together. You just put in TBI and then the term that you want to search. Let's search depression, TBI and depression, and click on that, and you see the different articles. And then you can follow these articles and see the summaries of the article. And at least to give you an idea of what's going on, what the research is, what certain new treatments there might be. There's the customized search engine, but lower on the page are filtered searches. I've set up these searches filtered by keywords. So if you want to find out what the latest in TBI diagnosis is, we'll click here.
Someone was asking, is this more for professionals or survivors? And I think my response would be, it's really for anybody. It's tons of information. It's just kind of a search engine.
Let's say you have a symptom, and I'm scrolling down here, let's call it hyperactivity. You could at least click on this and find some literature and say, oh, that's an interesting thing. I'll make some notes about this and I'll discuss it with my neurologist or whomever.
Dan, just real quick, someone was asking about your website, and that's dangardnermd.com, correct?
That's correct, www.dangardnermd.com. In adjusting to the injuries, we can. It's very important. And even if that's years afterwards, I've seen patients who are decades afterwards who have had untreated, unaddressed needs. And because maybe there's a better understanding, maybe some advances, there still is a possibility for continuing rehab. So the big challenge is we've done everything we can to fix it. So how do we adapt to the new me? The first thing is to grieve the losses, come to terms with I am not the same person. I don't have the same capabilities and so on. That's tough. It's painful. And I can tell you from my experience, a lot of people have what I call incomplete grieving. I've seen people who isolate themselves, stand in other people because it's a reminder of who I used to be. And so instead of coming to terms with it, they just sort of deny it. And they say, well, I'm not going to go out in public until I'm just as good as I used to be. And what if that doesn't happen? What if there's a permanent change? What are we going to do? So grieving the loss is very important. Talking about it with therapists, with friends, family, and so on. The other thing is appreciate the past. I try to appreciate what I could do in the past I no longer can do. I try to look at it and say, well, you know, I had those X number of years of being able to run or to ski or to play tennis or whatever. And I feel grateful I had the opportunity. Are you familiar with Marie Kondo, who's quite popular on organizing and decluttering one's home? She has a ritual of going through your closet and putting clothing on the bed and then taking each garment. And if you're going to use it, you put it in one pile. If you no longer need it, instead of just discarding it or putting it in a discard pile, you thank it. You say, thank you for the pleasure, for the help you've given me over these years. So appreciating what we had in the past, then coming to appreciate my current capabilities and opportunities. I can't do the same job I did. I can't be as helpful, but what can I do? What's left? What resources do I have? What am I capable of doing? Focus on that. And that gets me to two big areas. The first is how can I help myself? The second is how can I help others? My great belief is that the best way we can feel satisfied and better is to be able to do both. I feel proud about what I can do for myself that is within my abilities, and I feel proud about being able to help other people. Now, let me talk about how to help. I do not mean that I expect myself to make a contribution so that I get the Nobel Prize. No, I'm talking about simple, basic, but powerful things. Like, for example, being a good listener, being able to stand there and listen and acknowledge that you understand somebody else and give them the feeling that they're understood, they're respected, they're not alone. That's a good way of helping. So how can I help myself and how can I serve others? Most of us feel comfortable and fulfilled when we're connected to other people, family, friends, and so we want to find a way to do that. So one of the things in recovery that we want to do is educate ourselves. What is a brain injury and what can we expect and how do people usually maneuver and navigate recovery? I want to learn about this, so I want to read about it. Well, we know there are ABI classes. I know many of you have participated and benefit from the ABI classes. Online discussion group, like the Brain Injury Foundation has one, and hopefully people will take advantage of that, feel comfortable. The brain injury support groups, educational conferences or activities like the one we're having together today, and then reading about brain injury online. At the bottom of the search page, there are other resources, other websites that give up-to-date and useful information for survivors. Or send you a Brain Injury Foundation website, you can find those resources too. The other thing is tell our story. I think it's important to tell our story because it helps us process the experience the more we tell it and come to terms with these changes and adjustments in our life. And also we're sharing it so people can learn from our experience. Somebody who's maybe newly injured and a family who's newly injured, not knowing where to turn for resources and not knowing how to navigate with the system. Meetings, those are venues. Writing about it. At least one person and probably more have done some writing about their personal journey. in recovery. Also videos. Anybody can put up a YouTube video that to share one's experience. I think it would be helpful, educational, and inspirational for anybody to do that. As I said, be a good listener. You know, it sounds pretty simplistic, and maybe it is, but in my thinking, it's powerful. I think it's one of the most important components for me of a doctor-patient relationship and any relationship, to just listen, try to be empathic, meaning put myself in the other person's shoes and try to reflect to them what they're experiencing. Wow, that was frustrating, that was disappointing. Wow, you must have felt so proud when you did that, what relief you had, whatever. Be able to reflect that back. And one of my favorite sayings is, don't just do something, stand there, which is the inverse of the common saying, don't just stand there, do something, fix it. Sometimes it's important to do something and take action, but you know what, probably more often than not, it's important to just stand there and be a good listener. How else can we adjust? Find a mentor. This is important at any time in life, I find. I remember the people who were really helpful in forming my professional identity, and I think the same is true of recovering from a chronic condition. Mentorship. What do I mean? Somebody who's newly injured, a survivor in their family. What if they're paired with somebody who is further along in the recovery process, a survivor, a family member, and they can trade notes, and hopefully the imparting the information from somebody who's been there will help the newly injured survivor stay on the right path, the right resources, maybe avoid some missteps, and then also the mentor will be there for emotional support. It's hugely important. I know Kurt has submitted a proposal for a grant to start a formal patient peer support program, and we hope grant will be accepted and funded, and I would be happy to be involved in the implementation of that project. I want to talk about Henry's mantra, it could be worse. So who was Henry? Henry was my father. He had a good sense of humor, although it was corny, and his mantra, he'd always say, it could be worse. He'd say, Dad, how you doing? Could be worse. Later in life, he had chronic pain from a spinal problem. He got cancer, and I'd talk to him and he'd still say, it could be worse. In fact, a memory I'll never forget, his last hours of life, he's in the hospital, the family's around him. He's on oxygen, he's on morphine because of the pain and other things. One of our friends comes to the hospital room to visit him, and our friend felt awkward. Well, what do I say to somebody like that? And he says, Henry, how are you? So there's my dad, on oxygen, breathing heavily. And so my dad, who hadn't said much, he says, could be worse. So I think of that attitude and I try to emulate that when I feel frustrated and disappointed. I mean, look, life is full of these things. This restriction of the pandemic, the disruption, we get all these family events and holidays, all this stuff. I think of it, but I say it could be worse. Like, you know what? I've got internet connection. I've got power today. There's heat in my house. I don't have to boil my water. And the last thing I want is probably my favorite saying, and that is, the meaning of life is to discover our blessings, and the purpose of life is to give them away. What do I mean by that? Our blessings are our talents, our capabilities. That's what's important to realize, our creativity, to develop that and nurture and grow that, and then, of course, share those with our family, our friends, and the community at large. And to me, that's what makes life worthwhile and satisfying.